The starship Eclipse drifted silently in the void, its hull scarred and scorched from the relentless assault of the alien fleet. The once proud vessel, a symbol of humanity's defiance against the encroaching Kryloth Empire, now limped through the darkness, its engines sputtering and its crew battered. The command deck was a graveyard of flickering consoles and shattered glass, the air thick with the acrid smell of burnt circuitry and the faint metallic tang of blood. Among the chaos, a single figure moved with purpose, their hands steady and their voice calm. They wore no uniform, bore no rank insignia, and yet their presence commanded attention. This was Doc. Doc was a paradox, a civilian medic aboard a military vessel, a healer in a world of destruction. Their real name was lost to the crew, who had long since adopted the affectionate nickname. Doc's face was lined with the wear of countless battles, their eyes a piercing gray that seemed to see through the chaos to the heart of the matter. They moved among the wounded with a quiet efficiency, their hands deftly stitching wounds and administering stimulants. But it wasn't just their skill that set them apart. It was the way they spoke, the way they listened. Doc had a way of making people feel seen, even in the midst of despair. The crew of the Eclipse was a patchwork of personalities, each carrying their own burdens. Lieutenant Voss, the highest-ranking officer still standing, was a by-the-book tactician with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind. She had little patience for Doc's unorthodox methods, viewing their lack of rank as a liability rather than an asset. Ensign Cade, fresh out of the academy, was wide-eyed and eager, though the horrors of war had begun to chip away at his idealism. Then there was Chief Engineer Rourke, a grizzled veteran with a penchant for dark humor and a deep-seated distrust of authority. These were the faces Doc worked to unite, though the task seemed impossible. The crisis had begun hours earlier, when the Eclipse had been ambushed by a Kryloth strike force. The aliens had struck with precision, targeting the ship's command center and leaving the crew leaderless and disoriented. Captain Hale, a seasoned officer respected by all, had been killed in the initial barrage, along with most of the senior staff. What remained was a fractured crew, each member grappling with their own fear and uncertainty. Some argued for surrender, believing resistance to be futile. Others, like Voss, insisted on fighting to the last breath, even if it meant certain death. The ship was adrift, both literally and metaphorically, and the weight of its survival rested on shoulders ill-prepared to bear it. Doc moved through the chaos like a steady current, their voice a calming presence amid the storm. They had seen this before, the collapse of order, the rise of panic. It was a pattern they knew all too well, one that had driven them from the military years ago. Doc had once been a battlefield medic, patching up soldiers on the front lines of humanity's endless wars. But the rigid hierarchies, the blind obedience to rank, had worn them down. They had seen too many good people die because of bad decisions made by those who valued authority over wisdom. And so, they had left, choosing instead to serve as a civilian medic free from the chains of command. Now, aboard the Eclipse, Doc found themselves once again at the center of a crisis. The wounded filled the med bay, their cries a haunting chorus of pain and fear. Doc worked tirelessly, their hands moving with practiced precision. But they knew that treating the physical wounds was only half the battle. The real challenge lay in healing the crew's spirit, in giving them a reason to fight on. And so, as they stitched a gash on a young engineer's arm, they began to speak. "You ever hear the story of the Dauntless?" Doc asked, their voice calm and steady. The engineer, a woman named Jin, shook her head, wincing as the needle pierced her skin. "It was a ship like this one," Doc continued, "caught in a fight it couldn't win. The crew was ready to give up just like we are now. But one person, a lowly mechanic, refused to let them. He didn't have rank or authority, but he had something better. He had hope. And he convinced the crew to fight, not because they had to, but because they believed they could win." Jin looked up at Doc, her eyes narrowing. "Did they win? I mean," Doc smiled faintly. "They did. And you know why? Because they remembered what they were fighting for. Not for some abstract ideal, not for some distant command, but for each other. That's what we need to do now. We need to remember why we're here." The words seemed to hang in the air, a fragile thread of hope in a sea of despair. Doc finished stitching Jint's wound and moved on to the next patient, their mind already racing ahead. They knew that inspiring a few individuals wasn't enough. They needed to unite the entire crew. And that meant confronting the one person who stood in their way, Lieutenant Voss. Voss was in the command center, her face a mask of frustration as she pored over the ship's damaged systems. She looked up as Doc entered, her expression hardening. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I don't have time for your philosophical musings." Doc met her gaze, unflinching. "We need to talk," they said. "The crew is falling apart. If we don't do something soon, we're all going to die." Voss scoffed. "And what do you suggest? You're not even military. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand more than you think," Doc replied, their voice firm. "I've seen what happens when people cling to rank instead of reason. We don't have that luxury anymore. If we want to survive, we need to work together. And that starts with you." Voss stared at them, her jaw tightening. For a moment, it seemed she might lash out, but then something in her expression shifted. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not ready for this." Doc stepped closer, their tone softening. "None of us are. But that doesn't mean we can't try. You don't have to do this alone. Let me help you." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. Finally, Voss nodded, her resolve hardening once more. "All right," she said. "What's the plan?" Doc smiled, a flicker of hope igniting in their chest. "First, we need to get the engines back online. Then we'll figure out the rest." As they left the command center, Doc felt a surge of determination. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but for the first time since the attack, they felt a glimmer of possibility. The crew of the Eclipse was broken, but not beyond repair. And if they could just find a way to unite, to remember what they were fighting for, then maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to survive. The section ends with Doc and Voss beginning to work together, setting the stage for the challenges and triumphs to come. The crew's fate hangs in the balance, but the seeds of hope have been planted, urging the reader to continue. The Eclipse's engine room was a cacophony of clanging metal, hissing steam, and the low hum of failing systems. Chief Engineer Rourke stood amidst the chaos, his broad frame silhouetted against the flickering glow of a damaged reactor core. His hands moved with practiced precision, but the frustration etched into his face was unmistakable. The engines were on the brink of collapse, and without them, the ship was little more than a floating coffin. Rourke had always prided himself on his ability to fix anything, but this was different. This was a problem that couldn't be solved with a wrench and a curse. Doc stepped into the engine room, their presence immediately drawing Rourke's attention. The engineer's eyes narrowed as he wiped grease from his hands. "What do you want?" he growled, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "If you're here to give me another pep talk, save it. I don't have time for your nonsense." Doc held up their hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to help." Rourke snorted, turning back to the reactor. "Help? You're a medic, not an engineer. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" "I may not know how to fix an engine," Doc replied, their tone calm but firm, "but I do know how to fix people. And right now, you're not going to get anywhere if you keep working yourself into the ground. Let me take a look at that cut on your arm." Rourke glanced down at the gash on his forearm, barely visible beneath the grime. He hadn't even noticed it until now. With a sigh, he relented, allowing Doc to clean and bandage the wound. As they worked, Doc spoke again, their voice low and steady. "You're not alone in this, Rourke. None of us are. But if we're going to get out of this, we need to work together. That means letting others help you, even if you don't think they can." Rourke grunted, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe just relief. "Fine," he muttered. "But if you're going to stay, make yourself useful. Hand me that hydrospanner." Doc complied, their movements efficient and deliberate. As they worked alongside Rourke, they couldn't help but notice the change in the engineer's demeanor. The tension in his shoulders eased, and his movements became less frantic. It was a small shift, but it was enough. For the first time since the attack, the engine room felt less like a tomb and more like a place of possibility. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Voss was on the command deck, her sharp eyes scanning the readouts on the damaged consoles. The ship's systems were barely holding together, and every second brought them closer to disaster. She had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm under pressure, but the weight of command was proving to be more than she had bargained for. The crew looked to her for guidance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was failing them. Ensign Cade approached cautiously, his youthful face pale with exhaustion. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "we've managed to stabilize the life support systems, but the shields are down to 15%. If the Kryloth find us—" "They won't," Voss interrupted, though her voice lacked conviction. "We just need to buy ourselves some time. Doc's working on getting the engines back online. Once we have propulsion, we can make a run for it." Cade nodded, but his expression remained uncertain. "And if they don't get the engines fixed in time?" Voss hesitated, her mind racing. She had no answer, and the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know, Cade. I just don't know." It was then that Doc entered the command deck, their presence a quiet but undeniable force. "We've got the reactor stabilized," they announced, their voice cutting through the tension. "Rourke thinks he can get the engines online within the hour." Voss turned to face them, her expression a mixture of relief and skepticism. "And if he can't?" Doc met her gaze, their eyes steady. "Then we'll figure something else out. But we're not giving up. Not yet." Voss studied them for a moment, her mind racing. She had always relied on rules and protocols, but now, faced with the impossible, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. Finally, she nodded. "All right, what do you need from me?" Doc's lips curved into a faint smile. "We need you to lead. Not by rank, but by example. The crew looks to you for guidance. Show them that we're not beaten yet." Voss took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "All right, let's get to work." As the hours passed, the crew of the Eclipse began to rally. Doc's words had sparked something within them, a determination that had been buried beneath fear and despair. They worked together, each member contributing what they could, driven by the belief that they could overcome the odds. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but through it all, Doc remained a steady presence, their calm demeanor a beacon of hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rourke's voice crackled over the comms. "Engines are online. We've got power." A cheer went up across the ship, the sound of it almost foreign after so long in silence. Voss allowed herself a small smile, the weight on her shoulders lifting ever so slightly. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "Let's get out of here." The Eclipse surged forward, its engines roaring to life as it broke free from the shadow of the Kryloth fleet. But their victory was short-lived. As the ship accelerated, the sensors picked up a new threat, a Kryloth cruiser, lying in wait just beyond their escape route. The crew's elation turned to dread as the reality of their situation sank in. They had escaped one trap only to fall into another. Doc's mind raced, their eyes scanning the readouts. "We need to outmaneuver them. If we can get close enough to that asteroid field, we might be able to lose them in the debris." As the ship weaved through the asteroids, Doc found themselves at the center of the action, their calm presence a stabilizing force. They coordinated with Rourke to keep the engines running at full capacity, while Voss navigated the treacherous terrain. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Kryloth cruiser began to fall behind, its bulk unable to match the Eclipse's agility. The crew held their breath as the cruiser's silhouette faded into the distance, the threat momentarily neutralized. A collective sigh of relief swept through the ship, but Doc knew better than to celebrate just yet. They turned to Voss, their expression serious. "We're not out of the woods yet. We need to find a safe place to regroup and repair the ship." Voss nodded, her respect for Doc growing with each passing moment. "Agreed. Let's find somewhere to lay low and figure out our next move. As the Eclipse drifted into the relative safety of deep space, the crew began to take stock of their situation. They were battered and bruised, but they were alive. And for the first time since the attack, they felt a glimmer of hope. Doc's leadership had brought them this far, but the road ahead was still fraught with danger. The Kryloth were relentless, and the Eclipse was far from safe. But for now, they had a moment to breathe and to prepare for whatever came next. The section ends with the crew momentarily safe but aware that the fight is far from over. The seeds of unity and hope have taken root, but the challenges ahead loom large, urging the reader to continue. The Eclipse drifted in the shadow of a massive gas giant, its engines silent as the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage sustained during their escape. The ship was a patchwork of makeshift fixes and jury-rigged systems, but it was holding together for now. The relative safety of their hiding place offered a brief respite, but the crew knew better than to let their guard down. The Kryloth were still out there, and it was only a matter of time before they were found. Doc moved through the ship, their presence a quiet but steadying force. They checked on the wounded, their hands gentle but efficient as they administered treatments and offered words of encouragement. The crew had begun to look to them not just as a medic, but as a leader, a role Doc had never sought but couldn't deny. They had always believed that leadership was about actions, not titles, and now, more than ever, those actions mattered. Lieutenant Voss stood on the command deck, her sharp eyes scanning the readouts on the repaired consoles. The ship's systems were stable, but barely. She had spent the last few hours coordinating repairs and assessing their options, her mind racing with the weight of their situation. They couldn't stay hidden forever, and their resources were dwindling. They needed a plan, and they needed it soon. Ensign Cade approached cautiously, his youthful face pale but determined. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into his features. "We've managed to restore partial functionality to the long-range scanners. If the Kryloth are out there, we should be able to detect them before they get too close." Voss nodded, her expression grim. "Good work, Cade. Keep monitoring the scanners. We can't afford any surprises." As Cade returned to his station, Voss turned her attention to the larger problem at hand. They needed a way out, a path to safety that didn't involve another deadly confrontation with the Kryloth. But with the ship in its current state, their options were limited. She found herself wishing, not for the first time, that Captain Hale were still alive. He would have known what to do. Doc entered the command deck, their presence immediately drawing Voss's attention. "How are the wounded?" she asked, her tone more subdued than usual. "Stable," Doc replied, their voice calm but tinged with concern. "But we're running low on medical supplies. If we don't find a way to resupply soon, things could get ugly." Voss sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We're running low on everything. Food, water, fuel, you name it, we're almost out of it. We need a plan document, and we need it fast." Doc studied her for a moment, their gray eyes thoughtful. "What if we didn't try to run?" they said finally. "What if we turned the tables on the Kryloth?" Voss frowned, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" "The Kryloth are relentless," Doc explained, "but they're not invincible. They rely on fear and intimidation to keep their enemies off balance. If we can strike back, even in a small way, it might buy us the time we need to escape." Voss considered this, her mind racing. It was a risky plan, bordering on suicidal, but they were running out of options. "Do you have something specific in mind?" she asked. Doc nodded. "There's a Kryloth supply depot not far from here. If we can hit it, we might be able to replenish our supplies and throw them off our trail." Voss's eyes narrowed as she weighed the risks. A supply depot would be heavily guarded, and the Eclipse was in no condition for a prolonged fight. But if they could pull it off, the rewards could be substantial. "It's a long shot," she said finally, "but it might be our best option. Let's run it by Rourke and see what he thinks." Chief Engineer Rourke was less than enthusiastic about the plan. "You want to attack a Kryloth supply depot?" he growled, his voice thick with disbelief. "With this ship? Are you out of your minds? Do you have a better idea?" Voss shot back, her patience wearing thin. "Because if you do, I'm all ears. Rourke scowled but said nothing. He knew as well as anyone that they were running out of options. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. Fine. But if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We hit them hard and fast, and we get out before they know what hit them. The plan was set in motion with a sense of urgency that bordered on desperation. The crew worked around the clock, preparing the ship and themselves for what lay ahead. Doc moved among them, their calm presence a source of strength and reassurance. They knew that the success of the mission hinged not just on their strategy, but on the crew's ability to work together, to trust each other in a way they never had before. As the Eclipse approached the Kryloth supply depot, the tension on the ship was palpable. The depot was a sprawling complex, its defenses formidable but not impenetrable. Voss and Rourke had devised a plan to disable the depot's shields long enough for the Eclipse to slip in and out undetected. It was a risky maneuver, but it was their best chance. The attack began with a precision that belied the crew's exhaustion. Voss guided the ship through the depot's defenses, her hands steady on the controls. Rourke and his team worked furiously to keep the engines running at full capacity, while Cade monitored the scanners for any signs of trouble. Doc remained on the command deck, their presence a calming influence as the crew executed the plan with a unity that surprised even themselves. The Eclipse struck with the force of a thunderbolt, its weapons tearing through the depot's defenses with brutal efficiency. The Kryloth were caught off guard, their response sluggish and disorganized. The crew worked with a single-minded determination, their movements fueled by the knowledge that their survival depended on this moment. As the ship's cargo bays filled with much-needed supplies, Voss allowed herself a small smile. They had done it. Against all odds, they had pulled off the impossible. But her relief was short-lived. The scanners lit up with new contacts, Kryloth reinforcements, closing in fast. "We need to go," Voss said, her voice tight with urgency. Now. The Eclipse surged forward, its engines roaring as it broke free from the depot's gravity well. The Kryloth ships gave chase, their weapons firing in a relentless barrage. The ship shuddered under the assault, but it held together, its crew united in their determination to survive. As they hurtled through space, Doc found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. They had started as a fractured crew, bound together by circumstance but divided by fear and doubt. Now they were something more, a team, united by a shared purpose and a newfound respect for each other. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead was still fraught with danger, but they had taken the first step toward something greater. The section ends with the Eclipse escaping the Kryloth once more, their supplies replenished but their journey far from over. The crew's unity has been forged in the crucible of adversity, but the challenges ahead remain daunting, urging the reader to continue.